Respected Principal, distinguished guests of the day, honorable invitees from other institutions, students, and faculty members of the Kumaraguru College of Liberal Arts and Science, good morning and a warm welcome to the third annual Union Budget Discussion 2021, hosted jointly by the School of Commerce and Visual Communication, Kumaraguru College of Liberal Arts and Science. We have no doubt heard our Honorable Union Finance Minister deliver perhaps the most important budget of recent times. Confronted by a global pandemic and its lockdown effects and recessionary tendencies, in the months prior, our economy faces unprecedented challenges to overcome. As the Nightingale of India, Sarojini Naidu rightly remarked almost 73 years ago, independence is no doubt a matter of joy, but let us not forget that this independence has thrown on us greater responsibilities. Even today, these words remind us of the importance of being responsible and resourceful in times of crisis. The budget discussion today is also about facing these challenges and overcoming them. I am Tejaswini, the master of ceremony for this event. Without further ado, we begin the proceedings. I request our esteemed principal, Dr. Vigila Kennedy, a Fulbright scholar, to welcome the gathering.
Good morning, and on behalf of Kumaraguru College of Liberal Arts and Science, it's my pleasure to welcome you to this webinar on Union Budget 2021, which has been organized by the Department of Commerce and Visual Communication. It is my honor to welcome our two speakers of the day, Mr. Raghavan Srinivasan, the former editor of the Hindu Business Line, and Mr. Suresh Babu, Dr. Suresh Babu, Professor of Economics, IIT Madras. The two eminent speakers, I'm sure, will lead us through very important, thought-provoking sessions and thought lines on the union budget, which I think is key to a common man as well as to the country as a nation, just as we saw in the video. I extend my welcome to the faculty and students of Kumaraguru College of Liberal Arts and Science, Kumaraguru College of Technology, Kumaraguru Institute of Agriculture, and I also extend my special welcome to all the invitees from all over the country who have joined us today for this live session. Union Budget 2021, as rightly said by Tejaswini, has been presented in unprecedented times. I don't think during the last year budget presentation, any of these things would have been in mind. And we looked at things very differently. But today we stand at the crossroads of many things. Hopefully we have crossed the pandemic. Hopefully we are not expecting a second wave. And hopefully the vaccines are there to rescue us and bring back the economy, to put the economy back on roads. That's our wish and our prayer. And but however, the dent that it has made, the impact that it has made on the country as a nation, on the economy, on individuals, has been, I should say, devastating. And at this point of time when the budget has been presented, which is crucial not just for our country, but we are standing at the crossroads as world, because one nation's forward-looking or the progress can be impacted by what is happening around the globe. So at this point, we are very glad that we could meet together like this. Just another advantage of this pandemic situation, where wherever we are from, we could join here for this webinar and look at larger questions. I know many times when we look at a budget, we look at taxes, tax cuts, impacts, etc. But I think looking at the larger impact of the nation and the economy as such is also very crucial. So questions that we have are, is this a budget for immediate growth to make sure that we come out of the pandemic with lesser scars, or is it a platform for long-term growth? Is the focus for the budget right? Because we have seen certain very high priority focus areas. Linked to this, they have identified 13 champion sectors. Will they bring around the turnaround in the economy? Linked to this question, if these are the 13 champion sectors, how do we get the skilled workforce? How do we get the investments for this? And if we are looking at a skilled workforce, how is it going to impact the education sector? Because after all, the webinar is being hosted by a liberal arts and science college. So how is it going to impact the education? And how is it that the education sector should look at the future? And how do we think we should build it? So these are some of the broad questions. I'm sure that many other questions will be discussed by the speakers. And we are looking forward to a session which will be interesting, insightful, and introspective because, as again rightly said by Tejaswini, the country's growth is in our hands as individuals. Wherever we are, how do we contribute towards the growth of the nation? So, with these thoughts, I welcome all of you once again, and especially my very special and warm welcome to our two speakers. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am, for the warm welcome. I now call upon Vishnu Dhyanesh and Shriyanta, presidents of the college, to introduce our distinguished guests.
I take immense privilege in introducing our first guest of today, Shri Raghavan Srinivasan sir. Sir is one of the most versatile journalists and the former editor of the Hindu Business Line. An economist by training, he has built an unparalleled career in journalism spanning 4 decades. He has assumed editorial positions with the Hindu, Mail Today, Hindustan Times, Times of India, Financial Express, Indian Express, Business Standard, and the Anand Bazar Patrika Limited. Sir has made respect Sir has made contributions to most of the major international dailies and national dailies as well. He is well known for his aesthetic sensibilities in production, his down to earth character, as well as his inimitable, gentle, and calm self leadership. We are much honored to have you with us here today, sir, to discuss the unit budget and its impact. Thank you so much.
Good morning. Our next speaker, Dr. Suresh Babu, is an economist and professor at Department of Humanities and Social Sciences, IIT Madras. He has worked extensively in the field of applied macroeconomics, industrial economics, labor economics, and trade and development. His book, Hastening Slowly, India's Industrial Growth in the Era of Economic Reforms, provides a comprehensive analysis of the changes in the market structure and performance of Indian manufacturing industries since the onset of the economic reforms in India. He is a regular contributor to the economic and political weekly The Hindu. We are very privileged to have you with us today. I once again welcome you, sir. Thank you and God bless.
Thank you, Vishnu and Shriyanta. Here comes the most anticipated part of the day when we get to learn about the insightful overview of the union budget from our resourceful guests. I request Vikas Kumar, our academic president and moderator for the day, to kindly begin the discussion. Over to you, Vikas.
Thank you, Tejaswini. I will now briefly introduce the format of the discussion. We have two eminent speakers for the budget discussion with us today. Each speaker will have 30 minutes to present covering specific areas of the budget and followed by a moderated question and answer session for another 30 minutes maximum. So at the time of question and answers, I request the audience members to post their questions in the chat box. And now I invite our first speaker, Sri Raghavan Srinivasan. Sir, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Sahu. I was just, I was actually expecting the format to be in the form of a discussion, because we are looking at the budget a few days after it has been presented, and I'm sure has been sort of looked at and analyzed threadbare already. So, going forward from that point, what do we have? But anyhow, let me quickly basically try to address some of the points raised in the introductory talk. Um, is this a budget for immediate growth or is it a budget for long-term growth? In my view, I think it is a budget largely for long-term growth, um, because the focus has been on capital expenditure, on infrastructure projects, and these kick in with a quite a delayed lag period. Also, some of the allocations need to be studied in detail because a lot of the numbers, as has been the habit of this government, it likes to sort of present everything as in a very big way. So some of the numbers have been sort of added up. Actually, the outlay will take place over several years in the course of time. So the amount of money that is going to be injected into the economy this year is, um, really speaking, not substantially higher than the amount of money that was actually injected into the economy by way of government expenditure and outlays last year. That was a COVID year. So that's the first point to keep in mind, that the in terms of total outlay, the total expenditure is up by about 4 to 5 lakh crores. It's a significant sum. It's not a small sum, but there was a huge step up in expenditure last year, well over the budget estimate. So that's where the really big difference comes in, and which is the reason why we are going to end this current fiscal, which is going to end on 31st March 2020, with a fiscal deficit of over 9% of GDP, which is the highest we've had in recent times. Really a very, very significant number. It's not a number which can be sustained for any length of time. But nevertheless, the government has decided that the response to the COVID-19 pandemic induced slowdown in the economy is going to be a Keynesian one, in the sense that it will spend and sort of pump prime the economy, so to speak, and hope that the other sectors catch up quickly, and then you get into what's called a virtuous cycle of growth. So that's the first big takeaway, that this is a spending budget. And the government is hoping to sort of contain a lot of the spending in productive areas. So there is a substantial increase in overall capital expenditure outlays, which means that the inflationary impact of running this level of the budget deficit for the coming year is expected to be about 6.5% of GDP. Unlike previous year's estimates, of course, this budget, the one difference is that there is a certain greater level of transparency, in terms of what the government is actually getting in terms of revenues and how much it is actually spending, so, and how much is it borrowing, more importantly, because off-budget elements, a lot of borrowing hidden under PSUs or other agencies, that is sort of has been reduced. So the second is that finally, there is a reasonably conservative assumption which underlies the budget. Now, you must understand that when the government makes the budget, it has to make a number of assumptions about what is going to happen in the coming year. So the biggest assumptions are, of course, going to be on how much the economy is going to grow, and therefore what can be the projected growth in tax revenues, both direct and indirect, and therefore how much can we spend, and therefore you can project how much will be your borrowing requirement and so on. So, for instance, one of the changes from the past is that the nominal growth for financial year 21-22. That is, the nominal growth is the growth in GDP at current prices, which means that it takes into account the increase in the size of GDP plus inflation. Inflation is currently running at around 6.5, 6.8%. So the nominal growth assumption this year is about 14.4%. Which is fairly conservative because it's about 1% less than the nominal growth which was assumed last year. And mind you, last year before COVID, that the last year's budget was presented in February, and the we are looking at data really up to for most of 2019, and 2019 we had pretty benign inflation. 3%, 3.5%. So that meant that a nominal growth assumption of 15.5% would have meant a GDP growth of maybe over 11.5%, which was at current prices, which was quite unrealistic. So this time that has been a little bit more the same, which means that we can assume that some of these estimates would really be, would more or less stay at the estimated level. So, the other thing is that, the food subsidy amount, a lot of it was hidden by way of, making the Food Corporation of India take loans to meet part of the food subsidy bill. And this would be off the budget because FCI is theoretically a public sector undertaking. It's a company. But FCI's loans, which are underwritten by the central government, currently stand at 2.54 lakh crore rupees. It's a staggeringly large sum of money. And I think, the finance minister did the right thing by sort of taking that off. So what I meant to say is that overall, the assumptions and numbers may be a little bit more accurate than what they were in the previous budget. The previous budget, of course, became quickly irrelevant after March when the COVID pandemic hit India and lockdown started. But nevertheless, the numbers might be more the same. So we are looking at, first, the big number to look at is the deficit number, 6.5% of GDP. And there is a glide path given till 25-26 to bring this down to 4.5% of GDP. Now, this is still a very large number, and this is a fairly long time to bring down the fiscal deficit levels. But I think the first issue that I have going forward would be that whether the government would actually be able to control its deficit going forward. Whether two things have to happen. One, the growth will have to be consistently high and tax revenues will have to grow accordingly. And the other thing is that the government will have to curtail its expenditure. Now, from all projections, whether it was made by IMF or by rating agencies and so on, it looks like growth is going to rebound, right? The government, of course, is saying a V-shaped recovery. There are others who say there's a K-shaped recovery, which means some sectors are recovering very quickly while others are not recovering or still in decline. Good example would be the services sector, travel, tourism, aviation, which is still badly hit. But there are others like automobiles and so on, which have staged a smart recovery. So V-shaped, K-shaped, it doesn't matter. Overall, the economy is going to grow. So that part might be taken care of. But historically, once the government reaches a certain expenditure level, it has proven very difficult for it to pull it back. So if you look at even this year's budget, for instance, a lot of so the comparisons are given with last year's budget, but the comparison should be made with last year's revised estimate, which is what the government actually ended up spending. And if you look at that, you'll find that in almost every case, the current year's outlay, which may be a sharp increase on the previous planned outlay, is actually around or a little bit over what was the actual outlay what was the actual expenditure done the previous year. I mean, defense is a good example. The defense budget, is up by about 9,000 crore, but in real terms, it is actually 0.4% over the actual expenditure incurred the previous year. That is the ongoing financial year. Whereas, there was a sudden, unexpected surge in defense spending because of the standoff with China on the border. So that's the key. This thing. So let's quickly sort of look at what are the things which happened, in the budget. So, few things. One, of course, is that the finance minister did not increase taxation rates, whether on personal income tax or corporate tax. So that was a plus. But and as you know that ever since GST system came into play, the finance minister has no control over indirect taxes. So that has to be decided by the GST Council. Therefore, all she has to play with are, income and corporate taxes, customs duties, and of course, cesses and levies and surcharges. Now, so what happened? So, a lot of custom duties were increased on many things, on auto parts, on solar equipment, on steel scrap. Various things were done for two reasons. One, of course, that there will be a revenue element out here, but also this was done to sort of give some sort of protection to domestic industry in these sectors and give a push to the Make in India effort. The only thing is that as these sort of duties get wider and larger, for instance, on certain electronics and the same, so what happens is that it's no longer this thing. What helps one part of that sector will impact somebody else. So, you increase custom duties on display units for mobile phones, and then so the local display manufacturer may be helped, but somebody else who's actually making mobile phones in India would be impacted. The cost will go up, and so that is the thing. And then the other big this thing was to me was the increase in the FDI limit in the insurance sector. That was really the only significant reform measure which was contained in this budget, in my view. The FDI limit in insurance has been increased from 49% to 75%, which sort of makes it a much more attractive play for global insurance giants to invest seriously in India. It's one of the fastest growing insurance markets in the world now, seriously underserved in terms of insurance penetration, and therefore we are, that's a positive. Then, of course, there was the nominal, spectacular increase in health outlay. The headline numbers said that the outlay on health had been increased by a staggering 137%. Okay, and as this sort of as the finance minister was reading her budget speech, and we looked at this number, all of us, even me, I was in a television studio. I really welcomed this as a long overdue measure that India is finally correcting the serious underspending on the health front that we have been doing for many years. But again, as has been the case with this government, you really need to read their numbers very carefully. So if you break down the sort of 137% increase in the health outlay, what do you get? Actually speaking, it's like when the this current year's so-called health budget is simply not comparable to any of the previous outlays on health, because the government has changed the definition of what it includes in health, right? So, the bulk of the this thing, what they've done is that they've added spending on what is called wellness as well as nutrition. So the allocation for, so earlier, which used to go under simple water and sanitation uh, uh, allocation, has been now added under the healthcare budget, right? So, and the other thing which is done is that it has moved money out of which was being spent under a different head and put it under the healthcare. This thing, for instance, uh, the largest scheme for, say, nutrition and wellness, which was run by the government, was the Integrated Child Development Scheme. It included, till last year, it included 6 services: Anganwadi services, National Nutrition Mission, the PM Matru Vandana Yojana scheme for adolescent girls, National Creche scheme, and Child Protection Services. So that has been refashioned as the Saksham Anganwadi and Poshan 2 scheme. But if you look at the outlay, it actually means a cut in nutrition allocation of about 5,000 crore. So likewise, the allocation to drinking water and sanitation actually has been stepped up by 178%. This is not a bad thing by itself, from 21,500 crore to over 60,000 crore. But this has been added under healthcare. So if you look compared like to like, there is not a huge step up, about 10%, I think. But since the sort of bases have been changed, it looks like 137% increase. So, but that's this thing. That's another this thing. The other big takeaway for me was the disinvestment. This year's target is again very, very ambitious. Revenue from disinvestment, 1,75,000 crore. Last year, the assumption was 2 lakh crore. They actually got less than 20,000 crore. So that's one of the reasons why the deficit widened, because when you project a deficit of, say, 3.5%, assuming 2 lakh crores from disinvestment, and you actually get only 20,000, that much, your deficit widens that much. But this year, the 1,75,000 crore looks more achievable, primarily because if the IPO of LIC of India, which is one of the things which is on the anvil, if that goes through, that alone will garner them excess of 1 lakh crore. So, then there is Air India. There are they plan to privatize definitely IDBI Bank and one more public sector bank perhaps, and one general insurance company. If any of these things go through, then the disinvestment target will be comfortably met. So that's another thing. It's a serious step up in disinvestment. It also signals it clarifies the government stand on basically public sector undertakings in general. So in banking, given the completely unsustainable rise in recapitalization requirements as banks keep adding to their stock of non-performing assets, it is decided that it's going to limit its exposure in banking, maybe keep the number of public sector banks at not more than 5 going forward, through combination of mergers, some of which have already happened. You've known about them. Various PSU banks have been merged with each other. All the state banks have become one, so on and so forth. So you'll have 5 large public sector banks, which are hopefully will be better positioned to meet their own capital requirements, and also bring in skills so that they reduce their NPAs going forward, and also over time possibly vacate the insurance space. Both in general insurance and life insurance. Life insurance, of course, I think it will stay. LSE is just simply too big. But the disinvestment is a dilution of stake in LIC is a serious first step. So that is another signal that has come for me from this budget. And then the other this thing, of course, was that in terms of the creation of a new development finance institution. So this is something which the infrastructure sector has been actually asking for some time. One of the problems of infrastructure financing in the country is that we don't have lenders who are capable of taking long gestation exposures in infrastructure projects. Typically, infrastructure projects require 20 years or more time, and banks basically lend over a much shorter horizon, 5 to 8 years at best. And so this has been a problem, and that's one of the reasons why having a development finance institution which is focused on only lending, making long-term loans to the infrastructure sector is a good idea. Remember, we did have development finance institutions. In fact, many of the big banks that we have now used to be development finance institutions, ICICI, IDBI, IFCI, and so on. But at that time, when they were converted into full service banks, the thinking, one of the problems that these development finance institutions faced was in raising resources of equally long maturity. So, they had problems in raising funds which would stay stable with them for the 20 years that they're lending to borrowers. So there was an asset liability mismatch, and that and they had limited resource mobilization capacity. It was felt that as banks, they would be able to raise greater resources, and that's why they were converted to banks in the first place. So now when you're creating a new DFI, I'm not clear as to how this particular issues is going to be addressed. So there's a thing, but this was on the positive side. The issue which was really not addressed head on in the budget, of course, is the ongoing controversy over the 3 farm laws and the farmers' protest, which was happening outside of Delhi's borders, even as the budget was being presented. The finance minister made some indirect allusions to the farmers' protests and the reason for their protest in a speech. He read out a lengthy set of numbers saying how much the government has actually paid to farmers directly by way of procurement of wheat or paddy or cotton or dal. Impressive numbers, no doubt. But that's precisely the issue, that the farmers are agitated about the laws precisely because they fear that this MSP procurement program, which is how the government was able to reach so much money to farmers, is going to be taken away. So that was not really addressed. The other indirect signal which was sent was that the government sort of indicated that it's not going to wind up the APMC market yards, the so-called mandi system, anytime soon, because she introduced an agriculture cess, agricultural infrastructure fund cess, on the usual suspects, petrol, diesel, imported alcoholic beverages, and some other items. Basically, to fund it, this money will be given to APMC market yards to modernize their infrastructure, which is a good thing. The cess, of course, is a bad thing, in terms of this thing, because what the government did this time is that when they put the additional cess on petrol and diesel, they appropriately reduce the additional excise duty on petrol and diesel so that the pump price, that price that you and I pay for petrol or diesel, remain more or less the same. But there is no guarantee that this is going to be uh, uh, continued going forward. So that's another problem, for me, because cesses in general, cesses and surcharges are a bad way to raise taxes. So because uh, they bring in a certain level of unpredictability to the taxation scenario. Currently, for instance, all of us are paying 4%, surcharge on our taxes. 2% for education, 2% for agriculture. So um, we are already paying this thing. And the other thing is that the share of taxes, surcharges, and levies is now about 16% of the total revenues of the government. That's a high number because this 16% is not going to be shared with the states, right? So 16% the center keeps to retain. That's why the states have been complaining that the center is sort of doing them out of their fair share of revenue, because it is increasingly resorting to levying surcharges and cesses, which only fall to the central pool and to the center share and not to the common pool. So that's another sort of area of concern. The other this thing is that what was not there in the budget, and I think raised the question about, is there something for education? I'm afraid that I didn't see really any significant measures for on these districts. I didn't, So what were the big issues which were created by the pandemic, apart from the immediate healthcare one, right? So the part of that has been addressed. Of course, 35,000 crore rupees has been allocated for vaccines, and that money will be spent to vaccinate the frontline workers, healthcare workers, and so on, and that's a good thing. But hopefully, some of the increased allocation will be used to create basic infrastructure. The budget promises to create additional medical infrastructure by way of primary health centers and so on, which are badly required. But that was one part. The other part, of course, was the huge job loss, both in the formal sector and the informal sector. Millions of jobs were lost. And there was an income loss, of course, for almost everybody. I think last year, it would not be incorrect to say that virtually every Indian household, other than the very rich, experienced some form of income reduction. So the wage earners, somebody either lost their job or they definitely experienced a pay cut. So that seriously reduced the amount of money that was there in the hands of the consumers to spend. So that was issue number two. And then, of course, there was this massive impact on the MSME sector, the micro, small, medium enterprises, the small businesses. They want to, self-employed businesses and professionals. The informal service sector, which got decimated by the lockdowns. So I didn't see any significant attempt to address the problems of these sectors, right? So I was, in fact, asked at another gathering that I addressed, yesterday, where are the jobs for the youth? And I'm afraid I couldn't find an answer in the budget. There are no clear job creation schemes in the this. The government did attempt to encourage job creation in the relief packages which were announced during the course of last year. The so-called 5 mini budgets which the Prime Minister referred to. So what were they? They were in the form of sort of the government contributing the employer share of PF and contribution, on new hires only. So, so the idea was that if you hire people afresh, then, typically, PF contribution is, between 8.5 and 12% of your basic pay, which is cut from your salary, which as your contribution, and then matching contribution is made by the employer to the PF fund, and the government said that instead of the employer making that contribution, it will make it. So therefore, that was supposed to be an incentive for job creation, but it didn't really work, because first of all, PF deductions only happen in the organized sector and beyond a certain threshold of income. And the fact is that a bulk of the employment actually takes place in the informal sector or the unorganized sector. It's informal contracts, and the average income level is below the PF cutoff. So in that sense, it did not address the problem, and uh, you know, uh, it was not a big enough incentive for the organized sector to go out and hire at that time when they were actually cutting jobs, right? So the other thing it didn't do was that it didn't address the challenge of the jobs which have already been lost. So, this is an incentive for fresh hire, but what about rehiring people you laid off during a cutback? That issue was not addressed either in the relief packages, nor has it been addressed now. So I think what is going to happen is that, we're a very large country, and every number involved here is very, very large. So at an overall level, there would be a rebalancing, but for a lot of people who who lost their jobs, that job loss is likely to turn out to be permanent. So that's another challenging area as far as I'm concerned. Um, some of the other provisions which caught my eye, of course, is the proposal to create a so-called bad bank. Now, this has been something which has been talked about for a long time, that the one way to free up the public sector banks from their NPA millstone is to actually just club all the bad loans together, sort of put it together into one institution, and let that institution deal with that issue, which means it cleans up the bank books for all the other banks, and they would be able to step up lending with renewed vigor and therefore kickstart growth. That's the theoretical assumption. There are two problems here. One is that there is a reason why, the series of legislative measures that India has attempted in the past, from SARFAESI Act to the bankruptcy code, haven't really worked in solving the problem of NPAs, and more importantly, freeing up the money from these assets so that banks can go back into the lending cycle. Right now, a lot of that money is stuck in problem loans, and that money needs to be recovered so that it can be lent again to better and more productive borrowers. But that has not happened, so there are a number of reasons for it. Too long to go into this discussion out here, but legal issues, process of dispute settlement, even finding adequate interested bidders for all the assets, the amount of haircut that the lenders were willing to take in each case, all these were issues. And so you already have not been able to address that. So I wonder how a bad bank with a huge portfolio of problem loans in its book will be able to better address this problem. The second big problem with the bad bank solution, to my mind, is that it only addresses this stock problem, which means that if you have X amount of bad loans today and you take that X and put it into the bad bank, you address the stock of bad loans, but you're not addressing the flow problem, which is how are bad loans created? They are created through a combination of sort of uninformed risk taking, poor credit assessment on part of banks, and of course corruption, right? So none of these measures address these issues. It doesn't issue the address of the lack of capability within public sector banks primarily, but to a certain extent also private sector banks. They are not immune to bad loans either. Yes Bank, ICICI Bank, number of cases. So being private doesn't mean that you're simply better at banking than a public sector bank. Both have similar kind of problems. So how do you improve the ability to assess credit risk? That has not been addressed. Second is, have you addressed the corruption issue, which with collusion between bankers and borrowers, which leads to you know loans under false flags, so to speak, and siphoning off of these funds, which leads to a problem being created. So that is not being addressed. So the flow problem, is not addressed. So unless you change that as well, you're going to build a fresh portfolio of bad loans, and that's what's happened every time that previous bad loans were written off, provisioned for, and the banks recapitalize, and then they go and create a fresh set of problem loans, and then again the capital gets eroded, and again the government has to fund the bank. So this flow problem is not been addressed. So this is another another problem with this thing. So just let me a minute. So the other issue for me, personally speaking, is that, and this is just my personal theory, and I would welcome more views and on this subject. My this thing is that really our consumption base is very thin.
Sorry to interrupt, sir.
Yeah.
Sir,
Yes.
you can conclude in a minute so that we can hear the perspective of Dr. Suresh Babu as well. So, and
Yes,
we'll
sir,
finally
certainly.
get into the question and answer
Question
section.
answer. Yeah, certainly. Yeah. So
Sure, sir.
my this thing is that our consumption base is actually much thinner than people estimate. The size of our actual middle class is much smaller than the numbers which are touted, because today an annual income of 5 lakhs, which is considered the middle of the middle class band, is actually barely subsistence level income in a metro city, you know, for a family, right? It's a household income, it's not an individual income. So if a household of 5 people is earning 5 lakhs a year in a metro, they're basically barely above poverty, and their consumption is not going to be very anyway similar to the upper end of the band, which is a household income of about 20 lakhs or so per year. So the middle class, in my view, has been given a raw deal yet again, and that is going to impact on consumption going forward, because, like I said, the other challenges which are faced by the middle class in terms of job loss, pay cuts, and so on, that has not been really addressed by giving them a little bit more money in their hands. Nor are there, additional expenses, on healthcare or on even work from home, internet costs, for students like you, just, paying for a device and broadband access in order to simply attend class. All these are additional costs, and these could have been addressed with some kind of tax breaks, which were not done. So I'll leave it here, and maybe if you have questions, I'll be happy to answer them later. Thank you.
Yeah. So thank you so much, sir. And now I request Dr. Suresh Babu to join in so that we can have an discussion. Okay. Thank you so much, sir. It was indeed a really, a well overview of the budget that has been presented earlier. And now, there are many questions, and there is one thing very important, in the context of India being in the fourth industrial revolution, and the median age of India is, getting lesser and lesser and lesser, and now it is the post-COVID time. So, but in the current budget, it did not show any concrete investment in this in terms of employment or job creation. Suresh sir, how would you take this? Sir, you are on mute, sir.
can see that I am unmuted.
Yes, sir.
So, am I to answer that question, or is it?
Yeah, sir. Your views on that particular thing, sir.
Okay, I'm slightly little off because I thought that I'm going to speak, and I'm ready with my slides. So can we have this questions and this thing after I complete my talk? Would it be okay, or am I supposed to react to questions now? What is the kind of a format that we want?
Okay, so sure, sir. We will obviously have your presentation that will be presented, sir. But I just wanted to have this general overview because sir was speaking about job creation and employment, and I just wanted to hear about your.
I would reserve that to the end, and I would complete my presentation, and perhaps then maybe we could pick up these questions. I would prefer that.
Sure, sir. Sure, sir. We will now move for presentation, sir.
I have a small set of PPTs which I would like to share. Yeah. Can I share the screen?
Sir, can you please share your screen, sir?
Yeah.
Yes, sir, you can go ahead and share your screen.
But my PPTs are not seen.
So you can open your PPT right now, sir.
When I tried in the morning, it was coming perfectly all right, but now it's not visible.
Not to worry, sir. You can try to reshare your screen, sir. It will work. You can open your slides, sir. So you can open your presentation.
Really sorry about this. I can't see the
You can
PPTs at all.
minimize. You can minimize and open the presentation, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir. You're good to go, sir.
Okay, fine. Okay, so thank you very much for this opportunity to talk on the budget. And I shall be a little brief and a little fast because we are on time, I think. Okay, I would really like to add a caveat that I might sound a little repetitive because, Mr. Raghavan Srinivasan has already touched upon a lot of issues which are of importance in the current situation and the budget. What I am going to do is to focus on one single issue, and that is prospects for growth recovery. And I'm going to focus on this for a simple reason that, as Nobel laureate Robert Lucas mentioned, once when you start thinking about growth, it's impossible to think about anything else other than growth. So I think at the moment for India, the single most consideration is to revive growth. And can the budget do that in the immediate short run, or would it take time? So what are the considerations in the budget to really revive growth? Those are some of the issues which I would like to touch upon in this whole talk. Okay. So let me just give you a backdrop of this budget, the global economic situation in which we are now. And then we also see the famous V curve that the government has been projecting. IMF has been talking about. Of course, IMF did talk about K, and K is very, very important because there will be two recovery phases, or one wing going up and the other wing coming down, which has got implications on inequality. This is the broad backdrop in which the present budget was presented, and we find that India's growth really had a hit compared to the global growth, as well as the euro area, as well as the emerging markets. India's, which is a blue line, India's growth has been hit badly by the pandemic. So if really somebody is trying to say that we are doing well, we need to keep this in mind when we are talking about the recovery. So global output growth is expected to witness the sharpest contraction in a century, and that's why Finance Minister also talked about once in a century kind of a budget, and the contraction would be around 3.5 to 4.3% in 2020, and the cumulative loss of global GDP over 2020 and 2021 is estimated to be around $9 trillion US, which, to give you a perspective, is greater than economies of Japan and Germany combined. Okay, so that's going to be the loss that the global economy is going to face. And at an anticipatory level, the loss of output would be very severe in advanced economies, what I have mentioned as AEs, at 5.4%, compared to the emerging market and developing economies, excluding China, which stood at 5%. So the estimates of global growth have been getting revised, and as and when the pace of economic activity is picking up, when the lockdowns are getting eased, so we are yet to have a kind of a final figure on this. More or less, IMF's as well as other international agencies' prediction really show that this is going to be the magnitude of contraction. Okay. Now, the problem is the last point that I want to raise, that even if we see a rebound in global activity, it will be uneven and it will be subdued, since there is a problem that the infection rates are varying. There is this first wave, now the second wave, third wave might come, might not come. Of course, we are all hoping on vaccines. So the larger point that I want to flag here is that there is a point of uncertainty in terms of these growth rates. Okay. Coming to India, well, this is the historic low that we have had. The data from 1965-66, a very bad year. We find that in 78, 79, 80, another negative rate of growth. In terms of real GDP, we find that both real GDP growth as well as a 5-year moving average, this is going to be the largest contraction. The way these figures have been taken from the economic survey. So that's why I have not changed the figure numbers even, right? Okay. So this is government's official take on the growth rates are concerned. So what does it mean? It means that in the first quarter there was a contraction of 23.9%, 7.5% in the next quarter, but on the whole, NSO estimates a contraction of 7.7% in real GDP in 2021. Please, keep in mind that 1920 we had a 4.2% rate of growth. So from 4.2% to minus 7.7% is the kind of a swing that is going to happen in terms of the GDP growth rate. Now, there's a fourth contraction in India's GDP since 1960-61, and the contraction in 65 as well as 71-72 coincided with wars and droughts, and 79-80 was a severe drought, and there was also political instability. But I want to highlight one aspect, that a common factor in all these years was a steep fall in agriculture output. But now, right now in 2021, we had abundant monsoons, and we have the agricultural sector actually leading from the front in terms of the recovery process. So there is a slight change, even though the contraction might be really bad in terms of the numbers that we see. one silver lining is agriculture sector, which means that a kind of food shortages and food price increases that we might would have anticipated might not come actually. So that's why we call it as once in a century crisis, which has been unleashed by the pandemic and the public health measures. So when we look at this macroeconomy, then when we divide it into sectors, this is a sectoral picture that is emerging. Yeah, we know that close to 54% of India's GDP or the gross value added comes from the services, and 26% comes from the industry, and close to 20% now this year from agriculture, which I think is a very, very positive thing, because we find that over the years it has been steady at 18, 16, 17, 18, and now it has increased to 20 because the service sector has contracted a little, and the manufacturing is also going to contract, or the industry is going to contract a little. Okay. So at the sectoral level, perhaps one positive thing that we see is the real contribution from agriculture sector, and we want to really see the kind of uncertainties that is happening in the agriculture sector in terms of farmers' agitation and all this perspective. Okay. So let me just run through quickly in terms of what I would call as the highlights of this budget. Well, the strategy, as Mr. Srinivasan was highlighting, was a Keynesian one. I use the word was because it was already presented. Keynesian approach through which there will be an increase in expenditure, and this increased expenditure would actually pump prime and revive the economy. So we look at four important points as far as the highlights are concerned. First, expenditure, massive numbers, right? But the numbers don't look that good when we compare it with the revised estimates of last year. So you know that there is a budgeted estimates, and then there is a revised estimates, and then there is a budgeted estimates for the next year. So ideally, one should actually compare this year's budgeted estimates with last year's revised estimates. So we find out that the whole expenditure-driven strategy is not as high as we thought when we really compare it with the revised estimates. Okay, but then if you want to have an expenditure-driven strategy, then you need to have receipts. So the receipts other than borrowings are expected to be 23% higher than the revised estimates of 2021. Now I want you to think about this for a simple reason, that can we get to this target, especially when the overall economic activity is not really picking up? Isn't it really highly optimistic, or is it really a realistic one? Those are some of the questions when we look at the receipt sides which really come up. But in terms of the revised receipts for 2021 for receipts, which was actually 29% lower than the budget estimates due to COVID-19, we see an increase in receipts in terms of only 6%. So that seems to be okay. That 6% increase in receipts might actually come with the activities picking up. Does that 6% increase in receipts be enough, or will it be adequate in terms of increasing the expenditure, really lift the economy out of this low growth path, is the big question. So the expected nominal GDP growth is around 14.4%, and the real GDP growth is around 11.5%, with an assumption of 4.4% inflation now, which again seems to be all hypothetical at the moment. The big thing, as Mr. Srinivasan was pointing out, there is a candid admission of the deficits in this budget, and the revenue deficits have been pegged at 5.3% of GDP in 21-22, which is lower than the revised estimates of 7.5% in 2021, which was targeted to be 3.3% only, and the fiscal deficit, which targeted at 6.8% of GDP in 21-22, down from the revised estimates of 9.5% in 2021, is going to be a major worry for the government. And the government really aims to reduce this fiscal deficit to 4.5% by 25-26, and that's the whole question about the fiscal glide path. Will we be able to come to that number 25-26 is a big question that will be answered by time only. Okay, now so what are the highlights that if one is to really pick out? Well, first and foremost, no changes in income tax rates for individuals and corporations. Yeah. Second, there's this big announcement about agriculture and infrastructure development cess. And the cess will be levied on certain items like gold, silver. Change in customs duty, which I would say is a kind of a signal in terms of not to move away from the protectionist tendencies which the government has been really embarking on for some time now. And as expected, this is a mini budget. A lot of announcements were made earlier, and there is a kind of a continuation as far as this whole mini budget is concerned, because as part of this Atmanirbhar 1, 2, 3, there were a lot of things that were announced. But the important thing was perhaps the insurance sector, where the FDI limits have been changed from 49 to 74%, and that's going to be a major kind of a change. That's what we expect. If you look at from announcements in terms of resource mobilization for investments and to really bolster growth with this higher investments, where will the resources come from? And that's going to be my focus now. One, there's an excessive kind of a stress on disinvestment. In fact, this budget speech, we heard the explicit mention of the term privatization. So the approach of the government is going to be very clear. It's going to privatize. And the usual list is there: Air India, IDBI Bank, all these kind of names which have been going rounds for some time. The much awaited IPO of LIC would be completed in 21-22. That's expectation. I would say that this is a very ambitious kind of a target that the government has set, and our past record in disinvestment has been very poor, and even the intents now of the government is not very clear, because at a time when the market is booming, government did not show the intent to disinvest some of the major kind of stocks that it already holds. So not very sure how much are we going to mobilize from disinvestment unless there is a kind of a bold move from the part of the government. Second is this asset reconstruction company and an asset management company that will take over the stressed assets, the bad bank or whatever it is, and manage these assets in terms of freeing up the other financial institutions out of this whole legacy issues that they are burdened with. So that is going to be the other kind of a changer, which means that financial intermediaries now would be free of the past legacy issues which it had been tied up with for some time now. So they're now free to have a fresh start, and how all of that will really roll up is a different story. But then at least time being, we have this whole breathing space which would come from this asset reconstruction company. And as far as commerce and industry are concerned, well, textile parks, and I think it's a very good strategy in terms of bringing the focus back on textiles, because textiles in India is the second largest employment creator after agriculture, and that also links to the question which Vikas was asking me: what will happen in terms of employment and things of that sort, given the low level of skill that a vast majority of the population in the working age group having at the moment. I think it's an important aspect to stress on textiles. The other aspect in terms of employment, again answering Vikas's question, is this enabling incorporation of one-person companies, which means that entrepreneurship is likely to get a boost. The third point, Vikas's question is that, well, I think there is some space that would be given in terms of the startups. So that is seen as the kind of an approach for reviving activities in the short run, at least through the textile-centered strategy in manufacturing, other than, of course, the other high-tech and the other kind of R&D, high R&D industries, which the finance minister alluded to in her speech, and the one-person companies as well as the startups. Okay, so I would really then summarize the three big announcements in terms of resources as well as activities are disinvestment and this financial cleaning up approach as well as the push to commerce and industry. When we look at some of the other announcements, which some of which are very, very important, this portal to collect information on gig workers, I think it's a big one, along with the outlays for digital census, because it's time to move to very important aspect of the economy, that is data. Data has to be on time. Data has to really go to policy making. So a lot of information now is not available, especially in terms of the unorganized sector. And the gig economy has been really growing. So this could be a very, very welcome step. Apprenticeship Act amendment will be a very interesting thing, and how firms would take advantage of this is very important. In terms of transport, economic corridors, which all these states that are going to elections, which I had again, written in one of my articles in the Hindu, states that are really going to the elections are having a bonanza, a one-time bonanza. Tamil Nadu, Kerala, West Bengal, and Assam in terms of the economic corridors. And in terms of energy, I would really single out one important announcement, which is the National Hydrogen Energy Mission. And that will be a big step towards clean and green power. And the way it really, it is going to really pan out on the economy is very, very important. So there is some kind of an emphasis in terms of moving towards certain R&D intensive energy, cleaner energy based activities, along with textiles as a strategy for immediate industrial growth. Let's do some reality check on these numbers, which again, as Mr. Srinivasan was flagging. Okay, I will again take 5 numbers on which we need to do some reality check. One, the expenditure part. See, the estimated expenditure of what is 34 lakh, 83,236 crores during 21-22, then annual increase of 14% is a big kind of an outlay. But then the total expenditure, revenue expenditure is expected to increase 12%, and capital expenditure is expected to increase 29%. I want to come back to this capital expenditure increase towards the end of my presentation. So, and that's very important for my story, because as capital expenditure increase is seen as the fulcrum for enhancing the rate of growth of the economy. We need to look at those numbers very closely. Okay. Coming to the receipts, again, the receipts numbers seems to be highly optimistic. There's one small worry that really creeps in when we look at the receipts. Look at borrowings. Borrowings are expected to increase by 27%. Okay, that's another thing which I want to flag when I talk about the growth story, because once when you have higher borrowings, the whole sustainability of this growth path itself is in doubt. But the important thing that the states have been really asking for is increase in transfers. Okay, and there is some variation in that. We also saw the Finance Commission's award. So in 2021, the devolution to states fell by 13% at the revised stage. Grants were very high, 26%. So there's a kind of a shift in approach from a kind of a devolution approach to a grants emphasized kind of a scenario, okay, which is very important as far as the states are concerned. And I don't need to highlight the part on deficits. There has already been a lot of talk about that. Yeah. Target for primary deficit, yeah, which is nothing but the fiscal deficit excluding interest payments, is 3.1. Revenue deficit is likely to be 7.5% in 2021 as per the revised estimates. Yeah? And the GDP fiscal deficit is 9.5%, which is a historic high, which actually provokes us to ask one question. If you have a fiscal deficit of 9.5% of GDP, then the contraction of 7.7%, well, seems to be a little difficult to really tie up. So much of increased expenditure, why is that the economy perhaps contracted so sharply? Or is it because the expenditure was not in the right path? A number of questions come when we keep these two figures actually side by side, the size of the fiscal deficit and the growth contraction. So that's something which I want all of my students especially to really think of. And then, of course, the GDP growth estimate, nominal GDP of 14%. Yeah. And I want to highlight only one aspect here, that is in the budget 2021, GDP was estimated to grow at 10%, which was revised to minus 13%. So these are all hypothetical at the moment. Receipts is where we will have a problem, and that I've been highlighting, because tax revenues at the moment we have a buoyant GST, but that does not mean that that's going to continue. So the whole resource mobilization for spending needs to be really reworked. And borrowings are expected. That's again the point that I want to highlight. Borrowings are expected to increase, an annual increase of 27% over 2019-20. Now, in all aspects of this taxes, we see tinkering, basically in terms of slight increases. But there is one point that I want to bring your attention again. That is the disinvestment target. The disinvestment target for 2021-22 is 1,75,000 crores. And please remember, this target is 3.5 times higher than the disinvestment target of 50,000 crore of 2019-20. Will we be able to achieve this 3.5 times higher target? And if at all we miss this disinvestment targets, our revenue mobilization would actually fall flat, which means that the fiscal deficit numbers which we projected might not be anywhere near those numbers. More importantly, our capacity to spend would be constrained, which means that the whole story of expenditure-led revival itself then is really in doubt. Okay, so what is the story that I'm pushing? The story that I'm pushing is an expenditure-led revival, yes. But let's look at the expenditure side of that story. So far, we have been looking only at the revenue side of the story. Well, total expenditure in 21-22 is expected to be 34,83,236 crores, which actually is 1% higher than the revised estimates of 2021. It's just 1% higher. Can we really revive the economy with this 1% increase in expenditure? I have my own doubts on that. And this 1% increase, remember, is on revised estimates for 2021. Of course, one could argue that there were a lot of unanticipated expenses in 2021. If we had actually, worked out a better kind of a strategy towards combating those expenses and things of that sort. But the point is that given the state of economy, given the low levels of aggregate demand in the economy, really revive the economy, is this increase enough? Okay. And that's the point with which I would also like to leave you. Okay. Now, when we break up this expenditure in 21-22, over 1920, we find that there is a 14% increase. But an 18% increase on central sector schemes, which means the central sector schemes still continue to be the dominant ones. Again, the states might not be very happy with that. 11% increase in terms of centrally sponsored schemes. So the point that I want to emphasize that the federal structure in terms of spending is getting more and more skewed towards the center. But in the time of a pandemic, it was the states which had to really bear the brunt of fighting the pandemic. So this kind of an expenditure, post expenditure outlay, is little skewed or is more in terms of the center than towards the state. Okay. One aspect which I want to flag here again is the 17% increase on the revised estimates on interest payments, which is actually 23% of government's estimated expenditure in 21-22. 23% means close to a quarter of total government's expenditure is going for interest payments. And I think we need to start worrying about it now. A lot of people don't seem to really, flag this issue. This is a very high number, and we need to put the brakes somewhere. Okay, so this is the story that has been floating around, that capital outlay is the biggest in 14 years, and this capital outlay increase would actually pull the economy out of this whole low equilibrium that it has hit now. Let us now look at this capital outlay in terms of social capital expenditure and core capital expenditure and other capital expenditure. We find that the ongoing fiscal year, growth in capital spending is largely geared towards core capex, that is roads, railways, etc. And for fiscal year 22, spending will be on social capex, hospitals, schools, etc. Now, that is now a kind of an expectation in employment generation. Because at the moment, it is these roads, rails, and power projects that are going to generate employment. Once when we generate employment, we would look at the other, social capex. So that strategy is this kind of a medium-term strategy which the government is putting forward. Okay. Then, can this increase in capex turn the economy around? As somebody had already noted, this could be an optical illusion, because for the next fiscal year, it is actually excessively optimistic. And this massive increase of 34.5% in capital expenditure, which was, projected in the budget, compared to the budget estimates of 21-22, seems to be little unrealistic. Yeah? I will highlight one case to really, put my point across. Okay. Let us take the case of railways capital expenditure. We all know that there is no separate railway budget now. It's all clubbed into one. Okay. Railway capital expenditure under all regular heads of railway 2021 has heavily underperformed. For example, capex for new lines construction has reduced from 12,000 crores to 929 crores. Gauge conversion from 2,250 crores to 26 crores. Rolling stock 5,700 crores to 2,000 crores. Track renewals from 10,000 crores to nil. So this capital expenditure which the government is projecting seems to be skewed towards road building and employment generation toward this road building, which might actually revive demand, immediate demand or short-term demand in the economy, and revive the economy. That's a kind of a thinking the government is having now. There is one question which we need to take up at this point. It is the question of private investments. India has been seeing a decline actually in private investment growth. I've been discussing about this and talking about this for some time. Still, if you look at the value of new projects announced, we really feel that it is falling. And over time, it's highly fluctuating, and new private investments are really not increasing as expected. So don't look at the blue. Blue is actually the new projects of the government, which is more or less steady or even declining. The other one is the worry for us. More worrying thing is the value of stalled projects. That's record high now. By March 2020, stalled projects in private sector is really high. Government projects also got stalled, which means that even if we are making these big announcements in terms of capex, etc., ultimately the expenditure that is getting realized in terms of new projects is very less. A. B. There is a long delay in that because a lot of projects are stalled. Why? I would say that regulatory enforcement mechanism in India is actually deteriorating. And this again, I've taken it from the economic survey. We were actually talking about the whole improvement in investment climate and things of that sort until World Bank itself debunked it. Now, when you look at the regulatory enforcement overall rank of India, it was 69 in 2015. Now we have slipped to 74. Enforcement of government regulations, we have slipped. Government regulations are applied and enforced without improper influence. Yes. Right? Due process is respected in administrative proceedings. That's the only thing we find a slight kind of a improvement. But please also remember the number of sample countries have changed from 102 to 128. That's not the worry. The worry is that irrespective of the sample countries, why is that this whole regulatory enforcement mechanism is deteriorating? Second problem. If you look at the World Rule of Law Index, India stands only 69 out of 128. Again in 2020, again this is from the economic survey. And people can access and afford civil justice 15 out of 128. Civil justice is not subjected to unreasonable delay. That's the point which I want to highlight. There is enormous delay. 123 out of 128. So all these indicators show that there is something wrong in this whole environment, which is not really conducive to attract private investment. Two more things and I'll wind up. One, this whole, kind of a jubilation in terms of health sector spending. The boost in health sector spending comes primarily from the sectors dealing with preventive aspects of healthcare, which is very important, which is well accepted. The point is that the fundamental aspects of healthcare have not received the same focus. That is, even after the pandemic system. For instance, the National Health Mission, NHM, which is a flagship healthcare scheme, has received only 4% increase. The launch of Pradhan Mantri Atmanirbhar Swasth Bharat Yojana is welcome, but it will be assessed on how its projected spend over 6 years to improve health infrastructure. So 64,000 crore over 6 years, and that's the point about bringing big numbers and then having a long time frame to spend it. Okay, the worry is this. Historically, India's priority on health spending has been very modest, and nearly a third of it comes from the center. The Ministry of Health and Family Welfare just got around 0.3% of GDP. For much of the last decade, that's all they got. And even if you include states' health budgets into this goes to around 4% of GDP. Right? This is according to WHO data of 2018. Of course, this was more than our neighbors, of which we really, beat sometimes in terms of these numbers. When you compare with China, it is less. You compare with developed countries, UK 10%, 17%, and we are 4%. So that's something which we should really think when we really talk about the increased health expenditure. My big worry is this whole increase in public debt. public debt has now gone beyond 2008-9 levels. And I'm taking 2008-9 levels because that's a global financial crisis time. And, that's when we had higher levels of debt in the earlier decade. So, what it actually impacts is that the share of other ministries will decline because you have to service this debt. And we see exactly that. The share of farm ministry has increased and the share of rural development ministry has declined. But so somewhere you have to do this haircut. While the share of health spending is expected to a small decline, the same is for education. So the social sector then becomes a scapegoat for interest servicing then. Defense and interest payments typically take up a fixed share. Right? But this year, we don't find any change in defense. The share of interest payments in overall spending is expected to remain largely the same, which is substantial. And that's a worry because it squeezes the overall available outlay for development expenditure. So what are the prospects? The prospects, well, a couple of things. Countries across the world have raised spending aggressively, counter this COVID-19 impact. What India has done is small doses of incremental spending. There is a shift in this fiscal stance. I would say it's only a partial one. When I say this shift in fiscal stance, I focus on the shift which could actually shift the gears of growth process. Now, after budgeting a heavy ramp up for spending in the remaining months of the fiscal year, Finance Ministry is expected to tighten the spending in the year ahead. That will have an impact. Overall government expenditures to increase by 28% in fiscal 21 and fall drastically 1% in 2022. So cuts would be largely borne by the social sector. And the share of union spending on important aspects of social sector, which are important for long-term growth, like education and rural development ministries, are all taking a hit now. So let me conclude. What would be the overall outlook? Well, despite the rhetoric of big spending, the finance minister's overall stance remain a little conservative, and that's what the numbers really show. This historic contraction in Indian economy, which has led to a relaxation of the old fiscal rules, there's no doubt about that, and the government is candid about that. The government seems to have a very, very important focus, signal a focus on the macro stability, and that the government is not leaving, which is fine at one level, but then you have to have prudent expenditure as well as revenue realization for that. But the growth, from a growth perspective, the risk is that fiscal stimulus might turn out to be inadequate, put the economy back on a sustained growth path. And I would stop here, and if there are comments and questions, I'll be happy to answer. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. That was indeed again and very clearly we have got an overall look at the budget. So now can we have Raghavan sir as well on the screen so that we can have a discussion about the budget, as there are certain questions that has arrived and we would like to have answers to those as well. Okay, welcome back, sir. Again, so it is the time that we should be discussing about certain things, and there are a lot of questions. And one common thing, when I was listening to both of you presenting the overview of the budget, there was one common thing that was repetitive nature as well, and it is like about inequality. And when we're talking about life versus livelihood, do you think it is really done through a conscious strategy? Because the budget hardly mentioned about the migrant crisis we had during the pandemic. So, Srinivasan sir, how would you take this? Sir, you are on mute, sir. So still we are not able to hear you. Yeah, sir. Now we can.
You can hear me? Okay.
Yes, sir.
So as I mentioned, this budget is not, it's not really looked at some of the key problems which came up during the pandemic, for workers at all levels. So you mentioned about the migrant workers. It's not really looked at the nature of our informal sector employment, where were these migrant workers working? Why did they lose their jobs? And what can be done to recreate those jobs? It does not address those issues at all. Nor has it addressed the issue of, and this is a serious problem because our consumption base is much more dependent on this category of consumer. It has not addressed the issue of job loss among white collar workers. One estimate is that about more than 2 crore white collar jobs were wiped out during the pandemic year in India. And it has also not addressed the issue of reduced incomes, because yes, some pay cuts, some companies have rolled back pay cuts, but a lot of the others, the pay cuts have become permanent. The income loss which happened, even where pay cuts have been rolled back to a certain extent, the arrears are not being paid. So, what you lost as income last year is a permanent loss of income, it's a permanent loss of output. So those issues have not really been addressed. So as usual, we've got SOPs. Some things say, okay, we will have social security for gig workers, covering everybody. But you and I know that it's not this thing. A minimum wage code making it's already there, right? We have a code on wages, but the reality is that our actual wages are well below minimum wages across the board in most sectors and most parts of the country. And that's not likely to change anytime soon. How are you going to enforce this? And would we be in a position to compete in the global market if we enforce these minimum wages, right? On top of that, to add so-called ESI benefits, etc., to non-existent minimum wages, I think it's just, it doesn't mean anything much. So, in that sense, a budget has not looked at that. It has not looked at the structural problems which were exposed by the pandemic, in terms of the fragility of our gig economy. Why did, because you had migrant workers marching home within days of the lockdown being announced. How quickly did that system collapse? When the Prime Minister made appeals to people to continue to keep paying wages and so on, but that went largely unheeded. People lost jobs. Why did that happen? Why is it so fragile? And what can we do to prevent such a crisis from happening? One of the things, of course, there was a provision in the budget, which is some kind of provision for creating rental housing for migrant workers, so that when you lose a job, immediately what happened was that a lot of these migrant workers, which were employed in bulk in smaller units and factories and supplied through contractors, they would supply them with everything. They would, house them in sort of shared accommodation, this thing, and then provide them on a bulk this thing to basis to employers. And as soon as those guys, the tap turned off, these guys not only lost their jobs, but they also lost the roof over their heads, and quite often a source of food also. And that's why they were forced to go back home. So creating a sort of pool of rental housing, which means that a migrant worker comes into a city in search of work, they are able to access affordable housing for rent, not to stay permanently, not to buy. That's a good thing, but it's a very small provision, and it doesn't really address the other parts of the problem. So in that sense, the budget is not really addressed the structural weaknesses which were exposed by the pandemic. The budget is a continuation of the BJP government's belief that core infrastructure spending is the route to growth. And even there, as Professor Suresh Babu pointed out, that and they're putting all their bets on roads. It's not even the railways, it's not aviation, it's not shipping. So although some fishing harbors etc. are to be created, but they're basically putting all their eggs on roads. Road Ministry under Nitin Gadkari has been one of the few efficient and performing ministries in the government. So that's one of the reasons that the other guys have just simply failed to deliver. They've tried 3 rail ministers, all have failed, one after the other. So they don't have bandwidth in the government, and therefore they're also backing a winning horse in terms of this. In Gadkari at least delivers actual results in terms of road construction. So I think they're putting all their eggs in that. But I think Dr. Suresh Babu also asked this question, and I asked, is this enough? I don't think so.
Yes, sir. So, and again, so moving forward, it's Suresh, sir. So, how can we counter the revenue receipt problems with direct taxation, including tax policy on the super rich? Because again, here, like inequality is what prevails. Because the rich are becoming more richer and the poor are again being suppressed by the government. So, how do you take this? What's your view on this, sir?
I think this tax on super rich is unlikely to come. We have been talking about it and we have been hearing about it. Yeah? Because there was an expectation this time also there could be a COVID cess or there could be a tax for the super rich. But it is unlikely to come. Why? Because, as Mr. Srinivasan was mentioning, see, we should look at our consumption kind of a pyramid. Now, if you want to revive consumption pyramid, there is hardly anything that is left in the bottom of the pyramid because, the COVID crisis has really hit them badly. The middle, yes, surviving and, somehow managing. Where is the money? The money is on the top half of the consumption pyramid. Right? So the government just does not want to tax these people because if you are taxing them and if they are withdrawing their consumption plans not for lack of funds, but kind of an indifference towards consumption if they develop, then this whole consumption boom that is to come from this expenditure might not take place. So they don't want to touch that. I'll tell you a simple example of that. I'm working at IIT. For this whole 9 months or whatever months of lockdown, I didn't have any problem with my salaries getting credited to my bank account. But look at my maid who comes to my house. During lockdown, she could not come. Her family was in trouble because others did not have work. So the consumption of that strata then has fallen sharply. What is the government doing? The government is trying to push me to consume more. Yeah? This whole thing about, if you are not able to take LTC, you can actually avail it in terms of buying white goods or whatever, anything which is more than 12% GST, is to really, nudge us to consume more and then, create a kind of a recovery through that consumption. So I don't think we don't even need to think about the super rich tax at all. That's my pessimistic view.
And yes, sir. And again, sir, there is a myth that South and West are the states or the divisions that are contributing to the revenue, and it is North and East which are drawing from these funds. So, do you think that some federal policy will be affected in the long run, or do we need a better or different basis for allocation of these funds? Because when we see at the data, it says that 15.77%, it's allocated. To South by central government. But when we look at the data of UP alone, it is 17.93%.
Well, I think there is always this federal friction, which comes because the revenue contributing state and the expenditure drawing state may be different. The problem is when you have this kind of vast differences. We earlier had a mechanism through planning commission to address this whole thing in terms of regional development plans. Right now, we don't have a mechanism. And when we don't have such a mechanism, this kind of regional disparities would actually keep widening. Example, we know that whatever said and done, of all the investments, especially private investments that flow to India, vast majority, more than 60 to 65%, is cornered by 5 or 6 states. Once when private investments go to those states alone, activities in the other states will continue to be in the same level. So you need to compensate it with something else. So the center would give, in terms of devolution or in terms of grants or whatever it is. So the root of the problem in terms of this is to have a balanced regional development plan. And that is something which we have been, missing for some years now.
Yes, sir. And during the presentation, Raghavan sir, you discuss about the disinvestment and development finance institutions to counter NPA in the banking sector. So, what about the recovery of corporation debt or the corporate debt that it is the present state that India is in? So, how do we look at that particular scenario?
Well, as I pointed out, that we, all these measures, creation of a bad bank and a sort of asset reconstruction company and so on, basically address only the stock problem. That is, it is a solution attempted at addressing the current level of bad debts. It does not address the systemic generation of additional or fresh bad debt. What is that caused by? I pointed out that is caused by lack of ability to assess credit risk properly, poor lending decisions on the part of banks, which are driven by incompetence or poor information. Then there are other decisions which are driven by collusion and corruption, which is a real problem. It is a problem, and we have not managed to address that as well. On the other hand, we have this threat of vigilance inquiry and CBI and so on, which has sort of brought ordinary risk taking by the bank manager at the branch level to a near halt, because he doesn't want to answer inquiry questions endlessly in his career, right? So that is one of the reasons for the sharp slowdown in lending. On the other hand, the big decisions which are taken typically in a bank by a sort of loan committee, which will have very, very senior managers, they are continuing to take the big bets, and a lot of them are going wrong. So, the bad debt, bad bank idea addresses the stock problem, and even there, I am a little unsure about how it will actually end up curing this thing, in the sense that how will this ARC manage to find reasonably buyers at reasonable prices for the assets, the problem assets that it is left holding, which the banks themselves have not been able to do through the recovery process or the other recovery procedures which are already available. We have, like I said, a number of acts, including the bankruptcy laws, where you are supposed to basically find a new buyer or break up and sell the company within 180 days, and none of that has happened. We've barely managed to have 4 or 5 resolutions so far, in 4 years, because of legal roadblocks or regulatory roadblocks and so on. So governance capture of the process, by vested interests is a problem which again has not been addressed. So I don't see a solution in this budget in particular which addresses the corporate debt problem, right? What the government is trying to do is to limit its downside exposure. So they are trying to do that by 2 things. One, they're trying to sell off some banks so that they don't have to be responsible for recapitalizing the banks if the bank's equity gets eroded through bad loans. The second is that they're trying to create this bad bank so that whatever banks they have, the amount of fresh capital they have to inject into it is limited. It's frozen at this point. Hopefully, going forward, they will be able to control the increase in bad debts. So these are the 2 things. So government is trying to limit its downside, but it's not really sort of addressing the problem in a structural manner.
Suresh sir, is there anything that you would like to add to the same question, sir?
Yeah, I just want to say only a small point. I completely agree with Mr. Srinivasan on that. I think the problem is to tackle the issue not by the bad bank, but to tackle the issue of bad loans. Why are there bad loans? You need a bad bank because you are having bad loans. So bad bank is not the answer. Bad loans is the problem, and we are not tackling that correctly, perhaps. And that's the point that I wanted to add.
Yes, sir. And sir, there is another question. 2 years back we had Project Sasakt, a resolution for bad loans of PSBs. Then it was dropped, and now we are having ARC, AMC. So how different it will be, and why they dropped the previous project? So how do you take this?
I think because Mr. Srinivasan has already answered that question. Because we have not been able to resolve this, and when we started it, because a lot
Yes,
of
they've not
regulatory
been able to free up the money. You see, the key problem is that money is still stuck. They have not got the money, right? So if you're looking at whatever 4 lakh crores in steel sector, they have not got the money out, except for one company. No other issue has been resolved. Power, it is still stuck. Nothing has happened. Cement, it is still stuck. So, other than 1 or 2 cases. So the money, unless the money is freed up, if the money comes back into circulation, then the government's requirement to inject fresh equity capital into the banks is reduced. Till that time happens, they'll have to keep trying some solution because whatever they're trying is not working.
And sir, during your presentation, you also mentioned about the case-shaped recovery, and I was looking at some data. When we have about 850,000 companies in the country, and out of that, 18,000 companies contribute to more than 70% of the corporation taxes. So to me, it is a signal of that K-shaped recovery we are talking about, and rising inequality, that there is so much concentration of income tax, wealth tax, and profits in less than 2% of the total corporate world. So how do you take this up?
I think it is now very clear, as you yourself mentioned in this whole data thing, that it will have 2 forks. One part actually going up, a section of people whose income and assets and wealth and all going up, and another section would actually be moving down in terms of the quintiles of consumption and quintiles of spending. And unless and until we recognize that, I don't think immediately government has any intention to recognize that, because the economic survey also clearly says that it is growth that is the focus, not inequality. So at some point we'll have to reckon with that. If we don't do that, we know from the historical experience of countries, especially Latin America and other parts of the world, that if inequality reaches a certain level, if it's crossing a threshold limit, then that would actually bring the growth process to a halt. So that is where perhaps I think in the years to come, we need much more in terms of social spending.
Yes, sir. And sir, when you were discussing about the capital outlay or the capital allocations, the division of capital outlay into infrastructure and social sector. So do you think it is realistic? Because especially the infrastructure emphasis in a COVID year, which when social expenditure should have been higher, but it is the other way around.
Well, it's a very, very straightforward kind of a thing, because the employment multiplier effects of this core physical infrastructure is more. Other employment, yes, if we can think of employment generation, but it's not very immediate in terms of multiplier effects in social. So if you invest in physical infrastructure, immediately you can generate some employment, and that's the wish. That's a whole.
There are lots of other considerations which go into this, because physical infrastructure projects entail large contracts, subcontracts, and so on. And political parties need to get elected, and for elections they need money, they need support, and they build a support base also by distributing patronage. So patronage is by giving, business, by giving money, giving jobs, depending on the vote bank, what you try to do. So, social infrastructure doesn't give you an immediate return electorally. It pays back over a longer period. One of the reasons why we have historically neglected this sector, right? One of the reasons why we have neglected this is because politicians don't see an immediate return in that. They won't say, look, we did this, we improved the quality of outcomes in teaching in primary school. And people are not going to vote for you for that. So that's this. Whereas something which you can see is a more visible thing you can take to the voter. I mean, we had the same problem, say in the colony that I live in Delhi. Delhi is well funded. There is lots of money, central money, state government money, local. It's one of the richest municipal corporations in the country. So there's a lot of local money floating around. There's a lot of discretionary funds available to different people. The ward councillor has money, the corporator has money, the state, it's a city state, so so they have some money, and the center MP has some money, discretionary funds. And all of them used to come and install benches in our parks, colony parks. So each of our small parks has some 6 sets of benches donated by corporator this, MP that, so on. And I asked them, why don't you, in fact, there's a drain outside the colony. So why don't you sort of convert that into underground? And one of them very frankly told me, but where will I put my name, on the drain? I mean, if it's under the ground, who's going to see it? Who's going to vote for me? He'd rather have a lamppost or a park bench saying donated by corporate or so and so. So that is the problem at all levels across in the government. So they want, they want to show physical things which are easier and quicker. This thing. Second, it is distribution of patronage. Third, it is injection of money. I mean, I have conspiracy theories about that, but you should look at who's very interesting analysis. Just do it as a intellectual exercise. This coal-bound states, they have announced a lot of shops, Kerala, West Bengal, Tamil Nadu, and all. Just see who are the big winners of the contracts. Who's going to be getting that money to spend in that state? Which company? And you get an idea of how the system works. So.
Yeah. So again, sir, it is really difficult that we can actually understand the whole budget into us, but we tried the maximum and we have utilized the time effectively. And okay, so due to time constraint, there are a lot of questions, but we'll take 2 more final questions. So one is that, what is your take on India's green energy transformation and sustainable development path? When there is a target of 175, watts by 2022, whereas current installed capacity is only by 90 gigawatts.
So do you want me to handle that?
Yeah, sir.
Okay.
You can point to it.
Yeah, no, I think we had very ambitious stretch targets as far as renewable energy is concerned, and I think we're doing pretty well. Even we are the world's 3rd largest market for solar power. There are other problems which have cropped up as we got to scale in renewable energy, particularly solar and wind energy, which are cyclical producers of power. They're not sustained continuous producers of power. So multiple problems have come up, and one of the principal problems continues to be with the distribution companies. Financially they are not in a position to actually absorb all this power. And also continue with their legacy assets, because they have legacy assets, thermal power, long-term PPAs already entered into. In many distribution companies also have generation arms which are owned by them. So there's worker resistance to moving that. So in a state like Tamil Nadu, for instance, which has India's largest installed capacity in wind and second largest in solar, the TNEB continues to buy more than half its requirement from legacy thermal units, which it owns, because those workers, are afraid of losing their jobs if the energy is procured from renewable sources. So there are other issues which need to be now systemic issues which need to be sorted out. The second is, of course, on the technology and cost front, where uh, the government is also pursuing other agendas. So, for instance, it has imposed duties on solar panels, primarily with a view to restricting a flood of cheap imports from China. But that is also pushing up the costs for local, solar producers. So there are a number of other issues. So I don't think that we may not be able to meet the target in terms of renewables, but we are actually doing fairly well. This thing, but the next phase of growth is very much dependent on power sector reforms. We need to reform the distribution utilities, and improve their financial position so that they're in a position to actually pay for the power. We also need certain policy continuity issues, some of which have been exposed. For instance, in Andhra Pradesh, once Jagan Reddy got elected, he cancelled all the contracts which were issued by the previous government. And you can't do that. People have taken large bets. They've invested, millions of dollars in creating capacity. And you can't say that, like, I won, you lost, so off with all your contracts. So those kind of issues are there. But I think we are doing fairly okay.
Yes, sir. So, sir, we'll take the final question here. Okay. So, to both of you, sir, 2 points, 2 important points that you would like to highlight from the current budget. And do you think, according to you, is the current budget a fair budget for Indian economy?
Sorry, what is the last point? Current budget is what? Fair budget? Or
A fair budget for Indian economy, sir.
Yeah. Mr. Srinivasan, sorry.
Well, I think it's in that sense a low risk budget. The government hasn't taken a risk either by sharply curtailing expenditure in order to contain the fiscal deficit, nor has it taken a big risk by sort of spending money in areas where it is not, that its execution capacity is limited. So it's taken safe bets. It knows it can build roads, so you put a lot of money in roads. Certain other things are ongoing, you do that. So basically, it is a sort of, I would say, a pass mark budget. In the sense, it is not disastrous. It's not, I think, substantially imaginative or innovative. It's somewhere in between. And that has been pretty much the hallmark of all the budgets of this NDA government, from either NDA 1 or 2, if you see, essentially they tend to be sort of workman-like budgets, and they're not fiscally, they're fairly conservative, their approach. And that's how they continued. They're not broken any this thing. As I mentioned, I don't think the budget specifically addresses the structural weaknesses which were exposed by the pandemic, in particular last year, in terms of the nature of our economic growth, the structure of our informal economy, the fragility of our consumption base. These issues have not really been addressed. But what can be addressed, what the government is confident that it has the ability to tackle, they have addressed.
Suresh, sir, is there anything that you'd like to add?
I would stick to my the title of my article, which I wrote on the budget. It's a normal budget for an abnormal time.
Okay, yeah, got that.
It's just a normal budget, very, very clear in its terms of fiscal calculations, and they put it up front this year, kind of a thing. What I would like to have seen more would be a little more active fiscal policy, presence of that. I would say that the RBI has done its bit in different tranches of its policy announcements, and the finance minister could have taken some advantage of that. Well, we all know that the fiscal space that is available for the government is very limited. Whatever limited space, if they had utilized for really increasing the consumption demand from the lower half of the pyramid of demand pyramid in India, I think it would have been really good. That would have been my only wish, perhaps.
Yeah, so it is like, basically steady state economy budget, and it's nothing like, Big Bang. So
Yeah,
it is of that sort. Yeah.
right.
Okay. Yes, sir. So, sir, thank you so much. And that brings us to the end of the budget discussion. Back to you, Tejaswini, for the final words.
Thank you, Vikas. That was an incredible learning curve for all of us. Collective work is the secret behind progress. Let's mark the end of this event with a vote of thanks, appreciation, and gratitude to all those who contributed towards making this event a success. To deliver the vote of thanks, I welcome Dr. Shri.
Good afternoon to one and all present here. First, I express my sincere gratitude on behalf of School of Commerce, Kumaraguru College of Liberal Arts and Science to both our guest speaker, Shri Raghavan Srinivasan and Professor Suresh Babu for accepting our invitation and giving us a critical and enlightening perspective on the union budget. Next, I thank Principal Dr. Vijla Kennedy for her dynamic leadership and sustained encouragement that made this budget discussion vibrant and engaging. My heartfelt appreciation and gratitude to the team leaders of School of Commerce and Visual Communication, Dr. Rupa and Dr. Leo Getlu, for conceiving and executing this event so brilliantly. A special word of acknowledgement to the tireless effort of all the faculty members for encouraging the student participation, and especially Ms. Ananta Karthik of School of Visual Communication for her tireless efforts in making the poster, promotional video, and other publicity material with great gusto. I would like to place my appreciation and thanks to Mr. Francis Kuriakos, who had taken effort to organize this budget analysis session. This event would not be so engaging without the involved participation of the student leaders who compared and presented today. Finally, our deepest gratitude to all the external guests who warmly and consented to our invitation, and our students for their active participation. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, ma'am. This brings us to the end of the event. I wish you all have a great day ahead. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right.
Thank you.